Hello, sports fans. It's me, Sportsman Z, Bob Zolke, and today I am here with Game 3 of my American League Championship Series for 1978. If you will recall, the series is tied at 1 game apiece, with Boston having won the first game very convincingly, but having lost the second game very convincingly on a no-hitter by Dennis Leonard of Kansas City. And so, here we are. The series now moves to Kansas City for Game 3. And here I got the helmets on the field. I got a little new setup here. First of all, I got the helmets on the field. I'm taking a page out of Al Red Sox fans' book and putting the little plastic helmets on the field for each team. And I also have my mat laid out, my fold-up baseball mat, which I have added some labeling to make it easier for me to do the scoring for all of the positions, plus putting the out marker over here so that I have that. But that seemed to be a popular accoutrement the first time that I did a card and dice for the channel. However, the mat is so big that I had at the time done it on the floor and had the camera facing down from the desk. So now what I did was I basically went and got a tray table that I could put next to my sewing table, which is part of my desk, and so that I can accommodate the size of the mat and be able to use it. So got a little bit of a new setup there, and I do have some small plastic baseball players on the way, which I will be using to play the various positions on the field and also run the bases. But they are on the way and they have not arrived yet, so for right now we'll do without those. But the plastic helmets will help out. And so we are ready for Game 3, Boston at Kansas City. The pitcher for the Boston Red Sox today in Game 3 will be Bill Lee. Not that Mike Torres was unavailable after pitching the one-game playoff with all the days that have gone by or would have gone by now. But Bill Lee is certainly a guy who was a major player for the Red Sox. He pitched 177 innings that year and was 10-10, so it's not like he can't be out there to pitch. And going for Kansas City in this very important game will be Paul Splittorff. And no matter what, there's going to be a game 4, but he wants to definitely put Kansas City up 2-1 here and give them a slight edge playing another home game again tomorrow. So, with that having been said, we will get underway. The lineups are the same as they were in the past 2 games. There were no injuries, so we don't have to account for that or factor it in. And there were no performances I didn't think that were so bad that it required somebody to be replaced. So here we go with Rick Burleson leading off against Paul Splittorff. And he gets a 1-3, which is a ground ball, third base A. So that will be 5-3, 1 away. Jerry Remy's up, and he gets a 1-7, which is a ground ball, first base A. So he gets a 3-1. And that brings up Jim Rice. And Jim Rice gets a 5-4 on Splittorff, which is a catcher's card X. Both catchers are 1s today. And that's a 12. And 12 and 1 at catcher is a foul out. So Boston gets no runs in the first. I will also try to keep my concentration. If you watched the second game of the ALCS that I did, which is Philadelphia against LA, you probably noticed that I lost track several times, didn't really know where I was, and didn't actually know what inning the game ended in.
So I'll try to keep my concentration this game so that that does not happen. And Paul Splittorff will not be batting, but Willie Wilson will be, leading off in the bottom of the first. And he gets a 5-12 on Bill Lee, which is a line out to third base. So it's a line out 5. And then we have Amos Otis up, and he gets a 4-5, which is a ground ball second base C on Bill Lee. So that's 4-3. And that brings up George Brett. And George Brett gets a 5-11, which is a walk. So George Brett gets on base. A walk given up by Lee. That's the first base runner of the entire game. And Hal McRae comes up, and he gets a 110, which is a triple 1-7 or a double. And that's going to be a double. And we will see what happens. The base runner is Brett, so they're just going to hold him up. And it's a base hit given up by Lee. And Hal McRae steps in, and he gets a 6-6 on Bill Lee, which is a pop out to short. And Kansas City gets no runs, and Bill Lee gets out of the inning unscathed. What was that, 6-6? So pop out to short, yeah. Pop out to 6. So Carl Yastrzemski is up in the top of the second of a scoreless game. And there's a 5-6, which is a line out to shortstop by Yaz, which is one away. Oh, okay. So, line out to 6. I guess we'll just say it was 5-3. I don't remember what it was, but Carlton Fisk is up. He gets a 5-10 on Splittorff, which is a walk. So the Red Sox get their first base runner the same way that the Red Sox got their, or the same way that the Royals got their first base runner. And Fred Lynn comes up, and he's got a 2-4, which is a home run. Fred Lynn hits a 2-run home run that knocks in himself and Fisk. And that's a hit allowed and 2 earned runs. And that brings up Dwight Dewey Evans with nobody on, of course. And that's a 3-5, which is a single 1-11. And that's an out. That is a line out to third base. Line out to 5, so there's 2 away. And that brings up Butch Hobson. I like this board because it's nice and big, and I can there's a lot of room to roll the dice. Butch Hobson, 6-8, and 6-8 on Splittorff is a fly ball left field B. So fly out to 7. Now, when I get the plastic base runners and the fielders, then I may have to actually put like a small box over here, or I have a baseball field inside of a box. I might have to do that to roll the dice, because I could knock over the players. But right now there isn't that much to knock over, and it's nice and big and roomy. So that's nice. And Boston actually struck for 2 runs there in the top of the second. So now we go to the bottom of the second. And Darrell Porter batting against Bill Spaceman Lee. He was quite a character, if you remember. Double 1-4 single. And that will be a single for Darrell Porter. Or no, Al Cowens. Sorry, Al Cowens. So Al Cowens gets a single to lead off the second. Second hit allowed by Bill Lee. Frank White is up. Frank White gets a 6-8, and that is a single, and 2 runners are on with no outs for Kansas City all of a sudden. And another hit allowed by Bill Lee. And Clint Hurdle comes up, and he gets a 5-11, which is a walk to load the bases. Bill Lee is in a lot of trouble right now, folks. He is in a lot of trouble. Bases loaded, no outs, and Freddie Patek up.
And he gets a 6-4, which is a fly ball center field B, and knocks in at least 1 run. So they do get one of those 2 runs back. Sac fly to 7. That brings up Willie Wilson with still 2 runners on and only 1 out. And there's a 4-3 on Bill Lee. That's the hit to the left fielder, hit in the air to the left fielder, and that's Yaz, and he's a 1. So that's a 20 and a 1. Probably is going to be an out, and I would guess an out where nobody... no, that's a roll again. 12. And that's an out 5. Runner on third scores, others hold, and that's what I was going to say, that probably it's a fly out where nobody advances. And that's exactly what it is, so fly out to 7. And now there's 2 outs with runners at first and second. Bill Lee still in a little bit of trouble, though. Amos Otis up, and he gets a 6-7, which is a fly ball to right field B. So fly out to 9, and they can only get, the Royals can only get one of the runs back by knocking in Al Cowens with a sacrifice fly. And that brings up George Scott to lead off the top of the 3rd for the Bobos. And he gets a 3-4, which is a ground ball pitcher A. So pitcher A would be 1, 2, 3. Rick Burleson comes up, and he gets a 4-5 on Splittorff, which is a fly ball center field B. That's 2 away. Fly out to 8. And that brings up Jerry Remy, and Jerry Remy gets a 5-2, which is a fly ball right field B, and he flies out to 9, and that ends the inning, and Boston gets no runs, and they still maintain their 2-1 lead. But George Brett is going to be leading it off for Kansas City coming up here in the bottom of the 3rd against the Spaceman, and he gets a ground ball shortstop A on 3-8. Let's see, 3-8, shortstop A, okay, so 6-3, he's out. Brings up Hal McRae, he gets a 3-7, which is a fly ball left field B. Fly out to 7. And that brings up Darrell Porter, and Darrell Porter gets a double 1-12 single on 2-7. And that will be a single for Darrell Porter. Another hit allowed for Bill Spaceman Lee, and that brings up Al Cowens, and Al Cowens has a single 1 asterisk, so runners have to hold. And that's the 5th hit allowed by Bill Lee, and that brings up Al Cowens, and Al Cowens has a 4-5, which is a second base C, and that's an out. So 4-3, no runs come in for Kansas City. We go to the top of the 4th, and Jim Rice is coming up. And he gets a 6-12, which is a line out to first base. So line out to 3. Brings up Yaz, and Yaz gets a 3-5, which is a walk. So Yaz is aboard. Splittorff has only allowed his 3rd base runner right there, but he did allow a 2-run home run. So that brings up Carlton Fisk with 1 on and 1 out. And he gets a 4-8, which is a double 1-12 or a single off Splittorff's card. And that will be a single double asterisk. So Fisk rips a single and sends Yaz to 3rd, and now there's runners at the corners with 1 out. Kansas City's gonna play back for the double play with Fred Lynn up, and he gets a 1-5, which is a walk that loads the bases, and that strategy still is not going to change. And so yeah, and that brings up Dwight Evans. Oh, wait a minute. That was Splittorff. See, here we go. Here we go again. those hits. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, yeah, he did give up 5 hits, but he didn't give up that walk. That walk was Splittorff's, and he's given up 1. Well, he's still only given up 2 hits. All right, so and 3 walks. Yep, 3 walks. So bases loaded for Boston with only 1 out, and yeah. And Kansas City playing the infield back. 4-10 is a shortstop X, and the shortstop is for Kansas City is Freddie Patek, and he's a 2, and that's a 7. That's probably going to be a double play, and that's why they were playing back. 7 and 2 is an out double play. So 6-4-3, and they are out of the inning. And amazingly, Boston comes away with nothing there, even though they were really threatening. And that brings up Frank White to lead off in the bottom of the 4th. Or no, he made the last out, so Clint Hurdle will lead off in the bottom of the 4th against Bill Lee. And he gets a 6-9, which is a fly ball, left field C. Fly out to 7. That brings up Freddie Patek, and he gets a 3-3, which is a line out to second base. Line out to 4. And Willie Wilson. And Willie Wilson gets a 2-10, which is a fly ball, center field B. Fly out to 8. Kansas City goes meekly in the 4th, and now we go to the top of the 5th with Boston still maintaining the 2-1 lead. But they had a chance to make it much more last inning. Butch Hobson is going to be the leadoff hitter here against Splittorff, who is still out there. Ground ball pitcher A. So he bounces out to the pitcher in the top of the 5th. George Scott is up. He gets a 1-8, which is a ground ball shortstop A. So he bounces 6-3. And then that brings up Burleson. And Burleson gets a 5-4, which is a catcher. And the catcher is a 1. And that's an 11. I would guess it's an out. But, of course, I'm not that familiar with the... Yes, it is a foul out. So, foul out to the catcher for Burleson. And that is going to be the... that's going to be... the 5th for Boston, and we go to the bottom of the 5th. Kansas City still losing 2-1. And they will be bringing up Amos Otis to lead off here. He gets a 1-7, which is a fly ball to left field. Fly out to 7. 1 away. George Brett gets a 2-8, which is a single. So Brett getting a hit off of Bill Lee. And that brings up Hal McRae. Hal McRae gets a 6-8, which is a single. Yes, I pretty much knew that. Remembered it from seeing it before. So 2 on with 1 out. And Darryl Porter is up, and that knocks the guy right off of his base. 3-6. Darryl Porter. And that's a walk. So the bases are loaded. And Bill Lee is again in trouble, just like Splittorff has been. Both pitchers have been in a little bit of trouble this game. And that brings up Al Cowens, but Boston will play back with the 1-run lead and 1 out, hoping for the double play. And Cowens gets a single 1 asterisk and knocks in a run. So that knocks in Brett. And he gets an RBI. And the bases are still loaded. The merry-go-round is still loaded up, and Frank White is hoping to put a quarter in and get it to keep going. And he gets a 4-7, Frank White does, on Bill Lee. And that's a walk, and he does keep the carousel going around. And that's another run for Kansas City. And they have now surrendered 3 runs, and White has knocked in McRae, and so he gets an RBI. And that brings up Clint Hurdle, who says, I got a quarter myself. What's that get me? That's going to get me a single and knock in another run. And that brings in Porter, and that's going to be it for Bill Lee. Bill Lee goes 4 1/3. He can't get out of the 5th. With the bases still loaded and 1 out, and the Royals having scored 3 runs here and taking a 4-2 lead. They will bring in... Boston will bring in Tom Bergmeyer. And Freddie Patek comes up to the plate with Kansas City now in the driver's seat. And he gets a 6-7, which is a strikeout. So there's 2 away. That's the first strikeout of the game, I think, for anybody. And that brings up Willie Wilson. And Willie Wilson gets a 1-5, which is a strikeout. So Bergmeyer comes in. He doesn't fool around. But not before Kansas City gets 3 off the spaceman and leads the game 4-2 now. And that brings up Jerry Remy, trying to lead a Boston comeback here in the 6th against Splittorff. He gets a 1-8, which is a triple 1-6 double. And that'll be a double. So Remy leading off with a double. Another hit allowed for Splittorff, who hasn't allowed many. And Jim Rice is up, and he gets a 5-4, which is a catcher, and the catcher's a 1. And that's Darryl Porter, and that's a 7-1 at catcher. 7-1 is out on dribbler, but Remy moves to third. So 1-3. And Kansas City with the lead. They won't bring the infield in. No, they won't. 3-9, and that's a fly ball right field B by Yaz. But that's a sac fly to right. And that scores the run, and that's an earned run for Splittorff. And now Kansas City has a slim 2-1 or 4-3 lead. And Carlton Fisk is up, and he gets a 5-5, which is a fly ball right field C. Fly ball right field 9, and so Boston does come away with a run though, and they cut the gap but to 1 by the score of 4-3. And Amos Otis is up against Bergmeyer, and he gets a 1-7, which is a fly ball left field B. And he flies out to 7 for the 2nd consecutive inning. George Brett is up, and he gets a 6-7, which is a strikeout. And Bergmeyer just really is just mowing people down. He's coming in and not playing around. And 4-11 for McRae is a ground ball to the pitcher, Bergmeyer, and he is a 2-pitcher defensively. That's a 15. 15 and 2 is an out. So he bounces to the pitcher, 3-1 or 1-3. And no runs for Kansas City. And now we go to the top of the 7th with Fred Lynn up. And Boston trying to get at least one to tie this game right now. 4-7 is a single off of Splittorff. So Fredlin with a single. And the fourth hit allowed by Splittorff. And that brings up Dwight Dewey Evans, and he gets a 6-6, which is a triple 1-5 or a single double asterisk. And that'll be a single. Okay, so he gets a single. He goes to third. Now Kansas City will play the infield in because they only have the one-run lead. Butch Hobson is up with no outs. There's a 4-6, which is a single 1-4. And that will be a line out to third base. Hobson lines out to third. Line out to 5. Now it's a tough decision because a ground ball could be a double play to get them out of the inning. And George Scott is up. He has a lot of strikeouts and not the fleetest of foot, so they will play the infield back. Kansas City is going to risk it and play the infield back and hope that if it's a ground ball, it's a double play ground ball. And Scott gets a 4-7, which is a single and knocks in a run. So it's a moot point anyway, really, because it was a base hit. So, and then that's an RBI for Scott. And they're going to keep him out there. They're going to keep Splittorff out there for right now with Rick Burleson up and one out. 4-4 is a third base X. That's going to be George Brett, who's a 2. 18-2 at third base is an out double play. So Splittorff does finally get out of the inning by getting Burleson to bounce into a double play. 5-4-3. But not before Boston gets the tying run and makes the score 4-4. So we have in the bottom of the 7th, we have Darrell Porter coming up against Bergmeyer, who's still out there and has been really dealing it. Porter gets a 5-4, which is a pop out to third, just missing a home run. Pop out to 5, one away. That brings up Al Cowens, who gets a 5-5, and that is the home run, 1-18. And that is a home run for Al Cowens. And he gets his second RBI of the game on that, too. And Kansas City takes the lead again. This time by the score of 5-4. Frank White comes up and he gets a 4-7. 4-7 on Bergmeyer is a walk. So Bergmeyer walks his first guy of the game. And that brings up Clint Hurdle. Clint Hurdle gets a 2-4, which is a ground ball, second base, A, double play. So Clint Hurdle bounces into a 4-6-3 double play. But Kansas City does come away with a run, and that brings up Jerry Remy in the top of the 8th, and they are not going to stick with Splittorff here. They're going to take him out. So Splittorff pitched 7. He went 7 very impressive innings. And it doesn't really take a rocket scientist to figure out who would be coming in if the guy that I'm thinking about is on the team in this particular year. But he isn't. So they didn't have Quisenberry yet, I guess. So that means they're going to bring in Al Raboski, the Mad Hungarian. And he will face Jerry Remy. And that's a 5-9, which is a strikeout. So Jerry Remy gets gets a strikeout in the top of the 8th. And that brings up Jim Rice. And Jim Rice gets a 5-7, which is a walk. First guy allowed on by Raboski. Brings up Yastrzemski, and Yastrzemski gets a 1-2, which is a pop out to first base. Pop out to 3. And that brings up Carlton Fisk, and Carlton Fisk gets a walk. So Carlton Fisk keeps the inning alive. Moves Rice down to second. Raboski allows his second man on by a walk. And that brings up Freddie Lynn. And Freddie Lynn gets a 4-3, which is a single 1 off Raboski. And that is going to be an out. And there goes my marker, so hopefully I'm not going to need it. Line out to third base. Line out to 5. No runs for Boston. Kansas City coming up. That's going to be it for Bergmeyer, too. So 4 1/3, so 2/3. 2 2/3 Bergmeyer went. And that will prompt Boston to go to Dick Drago. Because they are still within catching range here. And this game is not by a long stretch over yet. And Freddie Patek will lead off against Mr. Dick Drago. And he gets a 5-5, which is a double 1-7 single. That's a single. So Patek with a single in the 8th. Hit given up by Drago. Brings up Willie Wilson. Willie Wilson gets a 2-6, which is a pop out to third base. Pop out to 5. Brings up Amos Otis, who gets a 2-11, which is a single. So that's another hit off of Drago. And that brings up George Brett. George Brett gets a 5-4, which is a home run 1-8, or a double. That'll be a double, and it knocks in a run. And the double scores Freddie Patek. And an RBI. And a hit. And, I mean, that's all really Drago has allowed since he's come on, is hits and now a run. And the infield will be in for Boston with McRae up. He gets a 3-5, which is a strikeout. So there is one out. And that brings up Darrell Porter, infield still in, and that's a 2-8, which is a line out to second base, right between two possible hits. Line out to 4. So now Drago is settled down a little bit. Infield goes back. Al Cowens is up, 5-6. That's a single, though, and it scores another run. And that run is scored by Otis. And Cowens with his 3rd RBI of the game. Drago with his 2nd earned run allowed. And Frank White, and that's a 6-6. And a 6-6 is a single and knocks in another run. And that brings another run in, another hit, another earned run, and that's going to be it for Drago's day. So Drago comes in and he only goes 2/3. Right? Is that right? Yeah, 2/3. They were really hoping for a little better than that. And that's going to bring in Bob Stanley. And Dwight Evans, no. Clint Hurdle is up with runners at 1st and 2nd and two people out, and hurdle up, and he gets a 4-6, which is another single, and that does load the bases. So I'll have to remember there's 2 outs because I'm not going to go fishing for that other marker. So hurdle with a single, and the only question is, are they going to send the lead runner, which is Cowens. And Cowens is a 1-16 runner, and that would be to center field. The center fielder for Boston is Fred Lynn, and he has a -2 arm, so it would be 1-14 going home Cowens, and they will try that, and they do make it. So Cowens also scores, which means that there's another RBI on that for Clint Hurdle. And that's another earned run on Drago's record. And they have, what do they have here? 4 runs in the 8th. And yeah, and now Freddie Patek is up with 2 down, and he gets a 4-3, and that's a walk to load him up. So the Boston pitchers all of a sudden are they're just doing a collapse. So Freddie Patek with a walk, and Stanley walks a guy, gets credit for walking that guy. And now that brings up Willie Wilson, and Willie Wilson gets a 4-9, which is a single 1-16, and that's a single which knocks in another run, and that run is Frank White. So there's an RBI and a hit allowed. Actually, really, he's allowed at least 2 hits. And another, well, no, that run is still probably, no, that run is his. So that's another run, 5 runs, and Amos Otis is up, and that's a 5-8, which is a double 1-7. Is that Amos Otis? Let's just make sure that that's Amos Otis, and it is. Double 2-8 is a double 1-7. Single double asterisk. So he gets a single and 2 RBIs. A hit, another hit allowed by Stanley. And that runner scores, and that runner scores. And then that brings up George Brett with runners at the corners and 2 out, and he gets a 2-8, which is a single double asterisk, which knocks in another run. And that brings in Willie Wilson. And that's another hit and another run. And that's 8 runs right here for Kansas City in this inning. And that brings up Hal McRae. And Hal McRae gets a 6-5, which is a fly ball right field C. And mercifully, this finally ends. Fly out to 9. And 8 runs scored by Kansas City, who looks poised to take a 2 games to 1 lead here in this series, unless the Red Sox, that's what, 8, 9, 10, 13 to 4. So the Red Sox need 9 runs right here. Probably unlikely off Raboski or even really me. But Dwight Evans is up, and yes, Dwight Evans is up in the 9th. He gets a 2-8, which is a ground ball shortstop. So he bounces out 6-3. That brings up Butch Hobson. Butch Hobson gets a 6-9 on Raboski, which is a strikeout. Raboski with the K. And that brings up George Great Scott, and he gets a 6-10, which is a third base X. The third baseman for Kansas City is George Brett, and he's a 2, and that's a 12. That's going to be something. He will get on base. 12-2 is a one base error by George Brett. So it was, up until now, it was a clean game, at least defensively. But Scott gets on by an E5, and we have to give that error to Brett. Make sure he gets credit for that error. And that brings up Burleson. And Burleson gets a 6-6, which is a ground ball A, third base. So he bounces out 5-3. And that's your final score right here, folks. It will be a final score of Kansas City, an incredible 13-4 winner. The losing pitcher, and Lee went, a third? Or Stanley went 1/3. The losing pitcher was Bill Lee. And, wait a minute. No, actually, he allowed the tying run. Bergmeyer allowed the go-ahead run. So, Bergmeyer will be the loser. And the winner is Paul Splittorff. And Kansas City is up 2-1, and they will be playing the next game tomorrow in Kansas City with a chance to ice the series right then and there. So for right now, it's me, Sportsman Z, Bob Zolke, signing off from what was a very good game for about 7 innings, but ended up being very lopsided.